First of all, thank you everybody joining us. I have the honor of delivering this cross-regional joint statement on behalf of following 44 countries: Australia, Austria, Belgium, Brazil, Brunei, Bulgaria, Canada, Cambodia, Croatia, Costa Rica, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Indonesia, Ireland, Italy, Japan, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Malaysia, Malta, Netherlands, Philippines, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Slovakia, Sierra Leone, Singapore, Slovenia, Spain, Sweden, Thailand, Timor-Leste, United Kingdom, Vietnam, and my own country, Republic of Korea. 15 years after adoption of the Global Action of Action to combat trafficking in person, the world continues to face evolving and complex challenges. Traffickers exploit conflict, economic hardship, and digital platforms to expand their networks, while victims suffer forced labor, sexual exploitation, and other forms of abuse. No country is immune from these practices. They affect every region, society represented here today. In particular, we are deeply concerned by the rise in technology-facilitated trafficking in person, including that which is linked to online scam operations and other forms of transnational organized crime. We verified by the mounting evidence, including from UNODC, documenting this operation and organizations, countless individuals have been deceptively recruited to perpetrate this criminal scheme, subjecting them to post-criminality, torture, and severe exploitations. The growth in such crimes have exacerbated human rights and humanitarian challenges, demanding urgent and coordinated action moving forward. This calls for comprehensive and multi-stakeholder response that bridges law enforcement, digital humanitarian, and human rights domains. We welcome recent efforts by member states and regional organizations to dismantle criminal syndicates and rescue victims of technology-facilitated trafficking in persons. Holistically, addressing trafficking in person requires prevention, prosecution, and protection, as well as partnership. This includes strengthening public awareness, identifying victims, enhancing law enforcement, empowering survivors, and guaranteeing access to justice and remedy, all critical to dismantling this criminal scheme. In this regard, we underscore the importance of regional and global cooperation, engaging government, the private sector, and civil society to counter trafficking in persons facilitated by misuse of technology. We also call for coordinated engagement of all relevant UN mechanisms, including UNODC, OCHA, and IOM, in supporting capacity building, prevention, and victim protection. We urge all member states to renew their political will and to act with unity, guided by common principles of human rights and international solidarity. Let today's high-level meeting on trafficking in persons serve as a solemn reminder that trafficking in persons is not merely a crime against individuals, but in certain circumstances may amount to crime against humanity. Together, we must strengthen global cooperation to end this scourge. Thank you.
Ambassador,
Sorry, we'll not
has trafficking in persons increased dramatically? That's what some of the reports say.
Sorry, we don't take questions at this time. Thank you very much. Thank you.
good to know.
I might be up here. I might have been up here. Could be me. Could be someone else. But
that's why I approach you.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I would not approach you. If it is someone that I cognitively registered as outside the purview of this
Yeah.
event, I would not.
no, I might be up here for it and stuff too. I just don't think we're set that far in advance. But no, I did see that they are on the, at least Eric's, whatever they're
No,
doing.
he accepted.
Yeah.
He accepted. I thought momentarily it would be very good, very good.
A little above my pay grade.
Sometimes when you come to think of it, it may not be such a bad thing.
No, it was,
After all.
but
So that's the flag of Sierra Leone. I think that's the president for this month. It's usually the first flag on the right, and it goes alphabetical.
Shifted, yeah.
Kazakhs asked me. That's why another reason why I'm here to take a photograph. Let me see if I can locate it. All right, I won't be taking more of your time.
I mean, you can see I'm very busy.
Good luck to you. All the best.
You too.
The 10,051st meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestine question. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Israel to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. I propose that the Council invite the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations to participate in the meeting in accordance with the Provisional Rules of Procedure and previous practice in this regard. There being no objection, it is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Mr. Ramiz Alakbarov, Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process and United Nations Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I give the floor to Mr. Ramiz Alakbarov. Our technical colleagues will allow the Council to hear you.
Can you hear me now, Mr. President?
Yes, we do. Please proceed and start again.
Thank you. Mr. President, Excellencies, today we meet at the moment of renewed hope, while progress on the ground is fragile and deep uncertainty persists. We must seize the opportunity before us to chart a better future for Palestinians, Israelis, and the wider region. Since coming into effect last month, the ceasefire has largely held in Gaza. However, recent airstrikes by Israel on populated areas have caused numerous casualties and significant destruction. Palestinian militants in Gaza have also continued sporadic attacks on Israeli soldiers, causing fatalities. This violence is jeopardizing the fragile ceasefire, and I urge all parties to exercise restraint and fulfill their commitments under the agreement. I recognize the commitments made thus far by the parties and the exceptional efforts of the mediators, Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and the United States, in sustaining the deal. The Security Council has also taken an important step in consolidation of the ceasefire with the adoption of the Security Council Resolution 2803. While still facing unbearable living conditions and seemingly insurmountable destruction, the people in Gaza have now experienced at least the first glimmers of respite from the near constant bombardment of the last 2 years. Families in Israel have been reunited with their loved ones who were held hostage by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups under intolerable conditions in Gaza. Other families have had the remains of their loved ones once returned and began the long process of mourning. But the bodies of 3 hostages have yet to be returned, with families waiting in agony for that day to come. The bodies of the deceased hostages must be returned immediately. Last week, I also met with the families of missing persons from Gaza. With tears in their eyes, they showed me pictures of their loved ones, who are presumed to be in detention or still buried under the rubble. All efforts must be made to identify missing Palestinians. These families also deserve closure. Mr. President, with the ceasefire largely holding, the United Nations has redoubled efforts to mobilize and scale up humanitarian assistance, seizing the moment to reach the population where they are. We must not risk a reversal. The coordinated international effort needs to be expanded, both in immediate terms to consolidate the ceasefire and over the longer term to realize a more secure and just future for all. Mr. President, the past weeks offered a measure of relief, and we acknowledge the increased volume of aid delivery into Gaza. We also must confront the grim reality of the situation on the ground. The 2 years of fighting have left almost 80% of Gaza's 250,000 buildings damaged or destroyed. Over 1.7 million people remain displaced, mainly in overcrowded shelters without adequate access to water, medical care, and food supplies. Last week, I traveled to Gaza, where I met displaced communities and humanitarian personnel working tirelessly on the grounds to deliver assistance. The picture remained bleak. While the availability and price of basic food commodities has improved, key sources of protein such as chicken, meat, and egg remain out of reach for many families. The UN and its partners are still facing challenges in providing shelter materials such as tents and blankets. As we enter the winter months, these delays must be urgently resolved. There is a critical need to transition from emergency humanitarian assistance towards enabling communities to rebuild their lives and restore essential services. Hospitals continue to struggle without electricity and reliable water, severely limiting their ability to care for patients. The water and sanitation situation remains alarming. Sheikh Radwan Pond has effectively become an open sewage tank, requiring immediate attention to prevent a public health catastrophe. Key materials must be permitted to enter immediately to repair vital water and sanitation facilities. The rerouting of humanitarian and commercial movements through the Philadelphia Corridor and Al Rashid Coastal Road has complicated logistics, further delaying the distribution of much needed aid. Despite these hurdles and setbacks, the UN and its partners are working to scale up the response. An immunization campaign to reach 44,000 children has been launched, and hundreds of water wells have reopened. Over 24,000 metric tons of aid had been collected, yet 190,000 metric tons of food, medicine, and shelter are prepositioned in the region awaiting entry. I call on Israel to expand crossing capacity and expedite the clearance of supplies, including UN supplies. The opening of the Jordan corridor and the Rafah crossings are vital to further scale up the response, and the renewal of the NGO registration is essential and remains unresolved. UN is engaged with Civil Military Coordination Center, including its 22 partners, mostly from the member states, to coordinate the delivery of assistance and uphold humanitarian principles. These efforts have yielded benefits for Gaza population, including increased food supply and higher levels of approvals for shelter and non-food items, particularly for government-to-government aid. I also welcome today's news of the restoration of the fiber optic internet service provision in Gaza, a positive result of these efforts. Mr. President, the damage in Gaza, physically, economically, and socially, is catastrophic. We cannot address only immediate physical needs. Psychosocial needs, social cohesion, and justice must be addressed. There must be a restoration of dignity and hope. These efforts must be anchored in clear political horizon for resolving the conflict, ending the unlawful occupation, and realizing the two-state solution. The task ahead is monumental and will require a well-coordinated, phased international effort. We must help create the conditions in which people can begin to rebuild their lives with dignity, and there is no time to lose. The European Union, United Nations, and World Bank are working to update the Rapid Damage and Needs Assessment, called RDNA, which in March estimated reconstruction's cost at some $53 billion US. UN's immediate early recovery approach in Gaza has been aligned with the Palestinian Authority's recovery and reconstruction planning and can contribute to realizing the objectives set forth in Security Council Resolution 2803. I welcome the European Union's convening of the Palestine Donor Group in Brussels last week. It demonstrated a strong commitment to durable recovery and reconstruction in Gaza, strengthening linkages between the West Bank and Gaza, and to full resumption of the Palestinian Authority responsibilities in Gaza. Preparations are also ongoing for the Cairo Conference for Gaza Reconstructions, which offers a chance to ally and recover priority with broader vision for Gaza's reconstruction. I welcome Egypt's continued leadership in this effort. Mr. President, turning now to the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, settlement expansion, the proliferation of outposts, violence, including settler violence, displacement and evictions continue to escalate at an alarming levels. Israeli military operations, particularly the northern West Bank, have resulted in deaths, destruction, and continuous displacement of thousands, particularly from refugee camps. Israeli operations have also continued deep in Area A. Settler violence has reached emergency levels. In October, during the olive harvest season, the UN recorded the highest number of settler attacks on Palestinians since the UN monitoring began, an average of 8 per day. The olive harvest is an economic and cultural lifeline. These attacks have injured farmers, destroyed olive trees, and decimated livelihoods. In many cases, Israeli forces failed to prevent or were complicit in such acts. In other instances, Israeli settlers have violently confronted the Israeli forces. Arson attacks and the desecration of holy places by settlers have further heightened tensions and illustrate the spiraling violence. It must stop. I note the condemnation of these attacks by the government of Israel, and the concrete action is needed now to end the impunity for these crimes. Palestinian communities must be protected. Palestinian attacks, including acts of terror, such as the recent ramming and stabbing attack south of Jerusalem, must also cease and be condemned. All perpetrators of violence must be held accountable. I appeal to political and community leaders to cease the incitement and incendiary language that only fuels further extremism. Mr. President, a robust Palestinian economy and financial sector is a critical enabler for sustainable recovery and reconstruction efforts in Gaza. However, Palestinian Authority and its economy continue to face immense challenges. Unilateral measures that undermine the PA should cease, and efforts to support and strengthen the PA should be intensified, including in implementing its reform agenda. The Palestinian financial sector, while demonstrating remarkable resilience, is under tremendous pressure and must be protected. Immediate measures to allow the repatriation of excess shekels banknotes and renewal of the correspondent banking agreements are urgently required to avoid exacerbating the crisis. Mr. President, turning to developments in Lebanon, I reiterate Secretary General's call for the parties to uphold their obligation to maintain the cessation of hostilities and the full implementation of the Security Council Resolution 1701. I also echoed Secretary General's call for an immediate cessation of all violations of Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity and respect for the 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement. Mr. President, the decisions made now will determine whether the ceasefire endures or unravels. The first phase of the ceasefire must be fully implemented, and I urge the parties to urgently reach an agreement on the modalities to implement the next phases. The challenges remain immense, but the cost of failure is unimaginable. We have the tools to lay the foundations for success, but the work ahead demands an unwavering commitment from everyone. UN resolutions, including Security Council Resolution 2803, and President Trump's 20-point plan provides the pathway forward. United Nations remains committed to seizing this critical opportunity to move from crisis management to conflict resolution. All our efforts must be guided by the imperative of establishing a genuine political process that will resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict once and for all. The New York Declaration and initiatives such as the Global Alliance for the Two-State Solution play a vital role. They mobilize political will, investment, and solidarity around a shared political vision. The United Nations will continue to stand with both Palestinians and Israelis. We will continue to support all efforts to end the unlawful occupation and achieve a negotiated two-state solution based on the 1967 lines, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states, living side by side in peace and security. Mr. President, I thank you and the Council for your attention.
I thank Mr. Alakbarov for his briefing. I now give the floor to those Council members who wish to make statement. I give the floor to the representative of United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alakbarov for briefing us today. Colleagues, last week this Council adopted Resolution 2803, sending a powerful message of international support for President Trump's 20-point plan for Gaza and the diplomatic efforts of Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt. This marks a pivotal moment after 2 years of horrendous suffering and is crucial to cementing the ceasefire and charting a course towards lasting peace. We urge all parties to abide by the ceasefire, and we reiterate that Hamas must locate and hand over the bodies of the remaining 3 deceased hostages. President, I will make 3 points. First, Resolution 2803 must be implemented fully, effectively, and in accordance with international law. We need an international stabilization force and trained Palestinian police deployed quickly to support the ceasefire and avoid a vacuum that Hamas could exploit. Hamas should uphold their commitments under the 20-point plan to disarm and end their governance over Gaza. Transitional arrangements must respect Palestinian sovereignty and self-determination and pave the way for a reformed Palestinian Authority to resume governance in Gaza. Palestine must be run by Palestinians. We look forward to the urgent formation of a Palestinian committee alongside the Board of Peace. Second, Resolution 2803 underscores the importance of the full resumption of humanitarian aid in Gaza. The humanitarian situation remains catastrophic. Heavy rains have deepened the misery, worsening shelter needs as winter closes in. The United Nations has confirmed that over 1.5 million people are in urgent need of emergency shelter, yet Israel continues to restrict life-saving aid. Every crossing and route must be opened without delay, and essential items, including shelter kits and medical supplies, allowed in. Last winter, at least 8 newborns died of hypothermia in fewer than 3 weeks. Those deaths were preventable. Israel must allow aid in now, without delay, and permit the United Nations, including UNRWA, as well as international non-governmental organizations, to operate freely and effectively. Third, while the ceasefire in Gaza offers hope, stability in the West Bank is essential to any sustainable peace. Yet we've seen further appalling incidents of settler violence during the olive harvest. Last month, OCHA recorded more than 260 Israeli settler attacks, resulting in Palestinian casualties or damage to property. This month, we've witnessed horrific arson attacks including on a mosque in the West Bank. These unacceptable incidents must be thoroughly investigated and those responsible held accountable. We also urge Israel to end its stranglehold on the Palestinian economy by releasing withheld clearance revenues, protecting correspondent banking arrangements, and facilitating shekel transfers from Palestinian banks. And we reiterate our call on Israel to halt the expansion of illegal settlements, including the E1 plans. President, this is a pivotal moment for the future of the region. The United Kingdom will continue to work with all partners to implement Resolution 2803 and to forge a just and lasting peace for Israelis and Palestinians anchored in a two-state solution. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Deputy Special Coordinator Al Akbarov for his comprehensive briefing. President, for over 2 years, the world has witnessed in anguish and disbelief a devastating war in Gaza, inflicting untold suffering on the Palestinian people in the Strip, blockaded, bombarded, besieged, starved, over 70,000 martyred, mostly women and children, almost the entire socio-economic infrastructure reduced to rubble. Demands for ceasefire unheeded, and calls for accountability responded with complete impunity. Yet, amidst this carnage, and despite the relentless Israeli onslaught, two major developments took place. First, the high-level conference on the peaceful settlement of the Palestinian question and the implementation of the two-state solution held in July, followed by the adoption of the New York Declaration on 12 September, and the resumption of the conference on 22nd September during the high-level week. The declaration committed to taking tangible, time-bound, and irreversible steps for the realization of an independent state of Palestine, reflecting the overwhelming desire of the international community. And then there was the second inflection point, the result of political engagement and sustained diplomacy, the Sharm el-Sheikh Peace Summit. Regional and international partners gathered around a shared objective to maintain the ceasefire, address the humanitarian catastrophe, and lay the groundwork for a credible political pathway towards Palestinian right to self-determination and statehood. It led to the adoption of Resolution 2803 by this Council last week. And it all started with the 8 Arab Islamic countries meeting with President Trump on 23rd of September. As part of that important group, Pakistan welcomed the initiative and personal engagement of President Trump and the proposals to end the war, rebuild Gaza, prevent displacement, advance comprehensive peace, and halt the annexation of the West Bank. Throughout this period, we have been constructively engaged, consistent with our principled and long-standing support for the Palestinian people and their inalienable rights. But despite these diplomatic advances, the situation throughout the occupied Palestinian territories remains dire, as also testified by the briefing this morning. Ceasefire violations persist. Israeli airstrikes have killed and injured civilians, including children. More than 300 Palestinians have reportedly been killed since the ceasefire announcement. This reveals a stark truth. Peace declared in words has not yet brought full protection and stability on ground. Lives are still being lost. homes are still being demolished and families remain in fear. The situation in the West Bank is no less grave. Israeli settler and military violence has escalated to unprecedented levels, with October recording the highest number of settler attacks since the UN began monitoring the situation in 2006. Entire communities have been displaced, especially in the northern West Bank, amid closures, raids, and increasing intimidation. Palestinians must be allowed to return to their homes, and communities must be able to function without constant fear. President, to ensure that peace efforts translate into meaningful progress, several priorities must be advanced. First, implement Resolution 2803 in good faith, thus maintaining the momentum generated by the Sharm el-Sheikh summit, particularly advancing Palestinian-led and owned governance, reconstruction, and institutional capacity. The Palestinian Authority's role is central. Peace cannot be negotiated over the heads of the Palestinian people. We hope that there will be more clarity on various aspects of Resolution 2803 going forward. Let me reiterate that together with the US and other Arab Islamic countries, Pakistan joined this process as it offers a pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood. Second, to ensure full adherence to the ceasefire with zero tolerance for unilateral actions, leading to a permanent cessation of hostilities and the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. We strongly condemn the attacks by Israeli occupying forces across Gaza. Third, guarantee unhindered humanitarian access. With winter approaching, Gaza's exhausted, displaced, and traumatized population requires full protection and assistance at scale. Obstruction of humanitarian assistance is a violation of international law and must end. Fourth, recovery and reconstruction of Gaza must commence without delay. Fifth, there must be no annexation and no forced displacement under any circumstances. Territorial integrity of Gaza and its contiguity with the West Bank are indispensable for a viable, sovereign, and independent state of Palestine. Sixth, bring an immediate end to Israel's illegal settlement, expansion, and all attempts to alter the demographic or legal character of the occupied Palestinian territory, including the historic status of Al-Haram al-Sharif. Seventh, to ensure accountability for grave violations of international law, because without justice, there can be no sustainable peace. And eighth, to break the cycle of violence, it is necessary to end the Israeli occupation of all Arab territories, including in Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon. There must be a political horizon, a credible, time-bound political process anchored in relevant UN resolutions, leading to a sovereign, independent, and contiguous state of Palestine based on pre-1967 borders with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. The International Conference on the Two-State Solution, its New York Declaration, and the Peace Plan complement each other and should serve to advance concerted and coordinated action to implement commitments for the realization of the ultimate shared goal, that is, the establishment of the Palestinian state in accordance with international legitimacy. That is imperative for durable peace and stability in the Middle East. And we must ensure that we succeed in this objective. President, Pakistan reaffirms its unwavering solidarity with the Palestinian people. Their resilience under unimaginable hardship demands equal conviction on part of the international community. This is a defining moment, of course. Commitments must now translate into concrete actions. Pakistan stands firmly with Palestine in its struggle for dignity, justice, self-determination, and the realization of their independent state. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alakbarov. Mr. President, just a week ago, this Council adopted Resolution 2803. Many of us voted for this resolution to uphold the ceasefire in Gaza. In the context of the fragile situation we observe, we call on all parties to fully respect the ceasefire in good faith and without delay, as per the resolution. But ceasefire is just the start. After 2 years of deprivation, destruction and death, people in Gaza need all hands on deck. As the winter approaches, humanitarian needs remain high. Access to food, clean water, shelter and medicines continues to be constrained. In line with the most recent advisory opinion of International Court of Justice, we repeat calling for lifting all restrictions on aid and humanitarian action, including the work of international NGOs. We welcome the response of the UN and its humanitarian partners scaling up assistance. This includes the vaccination campaign conducted by WHO, UNICEF and UNRWA. Additionally, we underline our deep concerns over reportings on the so-called mystery planes from Gaza. While more information needs to be shared with the Council, we resolutely stand against forced or encouraged displacement. Mr. President, ceasefire must also spill over to the West Bank, where flames of violence against Palestinians are spreading rapidly. We strongly condemn rising settler violence. We are alarmed by the ongoing displacement and mass destruction in the refugee camps and the surrounding areas in the occupied West Bank. Settlers' violence must be stopped. We take note of the recent step of Israel to demolish an outpost. We urge for more determined steps and an end to occupation in line with the ICJ advisory opinion of July 2024. Slovenia calls for full respect of international law in ensuring compliance and pursuing accountability. True healing requires real accountability, and true healing demands doing better, much better, to prevent another cycle of violence and hatred. We welcome the launch of the Palestine Donor Group in Brussels.
If I'm not misrecalling, that he was planning to have some kind of discussion with the BBC. So I was hoping this could all be sorted out fairly quietly. As it happens, I think it was 6 days after I sent the memo on to Ofcom DCMS, there it was in the Telegraph. And that then led to this whole sequence of events, including...
Repeat our call on Israel to hand over tax revenues that belong to the Palestinian Authority. We continue to call on Israel for the release of Palestinian civilians from Gaza, especially children, humanitarian and medical workers held in confinement without protection guaranteed by the international humanitarian law. While resolutely standing against terrorism, we also stand in defense of human rights. We are deeply alarmed by the attempts to reinstate the death penalty for persons defined as terrorists. We urge Israel to refrain from undermining the rule of law through the use of a penalty that the international community has pledged to abolish. Mr. President, we simply cannot forget the words we heard in this chamber. On the new medical term unique to Gaza, WCNSF, Wounded Child, No Surviving Family, by the MSF, or the terrible description on what malnourishment and starvation mean for a child's body by Save the Children. We know trauma of the Gaza war will span across generations, both in Israel and in Palestine. we call for collective efforts of the international community to address it and to prevent further hate, conflict, and extremism. Full implementation of the Resolution 2803 in good faith and without delay is a first step. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias, señor presidente. Panamá agradece el detallado informe presentado por el señor Ramiz Alakbarov, coordinador especial adjunto para el proceso de paz del Oriente Medio, coordinador residente y de asuntos humanitarios de las Naciones Unidas. Saludamos la presencia de las delegaciones de Israel y del Estado Observador de Palestina. Hoy, apenas 8 días después de que este Consejo adoptara la resolución que por primera vez en décadas de desconfianza, destrucción y sufrimiento abre una ventana de oportunidad real hacia un camino distinto al que han vivido los pueblos de Israel y Palestina, cuyo reto no pasa solo por sostener el alto al fuego, sino en poder transformar un momento frágil en un punto de inflexión histórico hacia la paz. El alto al fuego, alcanzado gracias a la mediación de Qatar, Egipto, Estados Unidos y Turquía, permitió la liberación de los rehenes que permanecían con vida y la recuperación de la mayoría de los cuerpos retenidos, así como el acceso de la vital ayuda humanitaria, brindando un mínimo de dignidad a familias israelíes y palestinas que han sufrido lo inconmensurable. Lamentablemente, el alto al fuego sigue siendo vulnerable. Cada acto que contradiga el espíritu de Sharm el-Sheikh pone en riesgo la credibilidad de los compromisos asumidos. Panamá, en su inalienable compromiso con el derecho internacional y como miembro de este Consejo, que votó a favor de la resolución adoptada la semana pasada, reitera el llamado a que la protección de civiles es y debe ser algo prioritario por todas las partes en todo momento. Por ello confiamos en que los garantes y mediadores ejercerán toda su influencia para asegurar el pleno cumplimiento de lo acordado y mantener vivo el espacio que este alto al fuego ha abierto para la paz. Gaza no puede seguir gobernada por el extremismo de Hamás ni por ningún actor armado fuera del marco del derecho internacional. El futuro debe construirse sobre un liderazgo institucional palestino reformado y unificado, capaz de garantizar seguridad para su propia población y para sus vecinos. En ese sentido, Panamá reconoce y saluda los avances presentados recientemente por la autoridad palestina, incluidos 23 elementos de reforma implementados como pasos indispensables para viabilizar la etapa de transición prevista en la resolución y en el esperanzador plan de 20 puntos del presidente Donald Trump. Señor presidente, la fragilidad sobre el terreno no es solo política. Las lluvias torrenciales de la semana pasada destruyeron miles de tiendas de campaña y refugios improvisados, afectando a unas 740.000 personas. Y a pesar de la mejora en el acceso a productos básicos, muchas familias siguen comiendo solo una vez al día. Mientras que en Cisjordania, incluida Jerusalén Oriental, la situación también sigue deteriorándose gravemente. Insistimos a que se detengan la violencia y las acciones que contradigan el derecho internacional y las resoluciones de este Consejo. La magnitud de la situación humanitaria que persiste en Gaza y en Cisjordania pone de relieve que la presencia de las Naciones Unidas y de sus agencias especializadas es importante para sostener la asistencia vital, proteger a la población civil y acompañar la transición ordenada que este Consejo ha delineado en sus resoluciones. Panamá reitera su firme respaldo y reconocimiento al trabajo de las agencias humanitarias de las Naciones Unidas que continúan operando sobre el terreno con enorme profesionalismo y sacrificio. Señor presidente, Panamá reitera que Gaza y Cisjordania, incluida Jerusalén Oriental, son partes integrales del futuro Estado palestino y que la solución viable, sostenible y humana seguirá siendo aquella que permita que los pueblos de Israel y Palestina puedan vivir lado a lado en paz, seguridad y dignidad conforme al derecho internacional y a las resoluciones pertinentes del Consejo. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, President. I would like to thank Deputy Special Coordinator Al-Akbarov for his insightful briefing. The occupied Palestinian territory is still the theater of bloodshed. In 40 days since the ceasefire began, and in flagrant violation of the agreement, Israel killed more than 310 Palestinians, many of whom are women and children. Algeria strongly condemns this brutal and continued onslaught. From Lebanon to Syria, to Gaza, to the West Bank, Israel is blatantly violating arrangements and disregarding mediators and guarantors. The experience of Resolution 2735 is still fresh in our minds, in defiance of the clear indication that Israel accepted, yes, accepted the U.S. proposal, and yet it broke the ceasefire in total impunity, in total immunity. We call upon the mediators and guarantors of the peace plan for immediate to take decisive measures to preserve the ceasefire and to hold the occupying power to its commitments. President, the people of Gaza are enduring a living nightmare in the wake of a war that has claimed over 70,000 Palestinian lives. And now, the survivors are now facing what many have called a forever misery. As a harsh winter approaches, hundreds of thousands are homeless, crowded in fragile tents, their belongings soaked, their children freezing and sleeping on bare ground. Humanitarian aid which was expected to flow freely is being hindered by Israel, leaving entire families facing the cold winter without shelter, without food, without clean water, and with disease spreading rapidly. This campaign, yes, it is a campaign of oppression, is not limited to the besieged Gaza Strip. In the West Bank, the situation is just as grave. We are witnessing an unprecedented escalation of settler terrorism, an extremist campaign of violence, of intimidation, supported and shielded by the Israeli occupying forces. Extremist settlers burn homes, burn mosques, burn olive groves. They terrorize communities. They seize land at an alarming rate. These blatant violations and heinous crimes are all efforts aiming at ethnic cleansing. Yes, ethnic cleansing, designed to kill the very idea of a future Palestinian state. Mr. President, the immense suffering of the Palestinian people demands concrete actions from the Security Council. It requires a genuine commitment to, first, preserving the ceasefire agreement. This must be our immediate and absolute priority. The killing must stop. Second, launching the reconstruction efforts. This means the complete and immediate opening of all crossing to allow for the massive unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid and flow of reconstruction material and equipment. Third, ensuring accountability. The thousands of documents, the thousands of documented Israeli crimes cannot be forgotten. There can be no impunity, no immunity for war crimes. Those responsible for these atrocities must be brought to justice. Fourth, lifting the historic injustice. This can only be achieved by ending the occupation and enabling the Palestinian people to exercise their inalienable right to self-determination and establish their own independent state, establish their own sovereign state with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. In closing, President, let us be clear. The immense sacrifices of the Palestinian people place a historic responsibility upon all of us in the Security Council. We have a duty to seek justice for them. Only through justice for the Palestinian people can we ever hope to build a true, lasting, and sustainable peace in the Middle East. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Господин председатель, признателен заместителю спецкоординатора ООН по ближневосточному мирному процессу Рамизу Алакбарову за брифинг по ситуации на Ближнем Востоке, включая палестинский вопрос. Прошло больше месяца после заключения договоренности между Израилем и Хамас о прекращении боевых действий. За это короткое время было достигнуто гораздо больше, чем за 2 долгих года войны. Освобождены все оставшиеся в живых заложники, на волю вышли тысячи палестинцев, содержавшихся под стражей. Появились условия для выправления гуманитарной обстановки в секторе. Вместе с тем приходится констатировать, что с заключением договоренности говорить о возвращении долгожданного мира пока еще рано. Обе стороны обвиняют друг друга в регулярных нарушениях. С 10 октября в результате ударов Цахал было убито более 300 палестинцев. Только за последние сутки под обстрелами погибло 33 человека в Хан-Юнисе, в Хан-Юнисе и городе Газа. Причиной этой не имеющей оправдания жестокости стало возмездие за предположительное нападение Хамас на израильские позиции в Хан-Юнисе, хотя само движение отрицает свою причастность к этому. До сих пор не возвращены тела 3 заложников. Сохраняются значительные ограничения для завоза и распределения гуманитарной помощи в секторе. Отличительной чертой последних дней в Газе стала желтая линия, разделяющая анклав на подконтрольный Хамас и Цахал территории. Возведение с подконтрольной израильтянам стороны заграждения и укрепления указывает на то, что оккупация сектора имеет долгосрочный характер. Это несет каждодневные риски для газовитян, оказавшихся по разные стороны баррикад, подобно жителям разделенного Берлина. Тем более, что многие участки желтой линии не маркированы, нередки случаи, когда палестинцы попадают под огонь, пересекая черту, даже не подозревая об этом. Вызывают тревогу и сообщения о произвольном изменении израильской стороной желтой линии на некоторых участках в городе Газа и в нарушение соглашения о прекращении огня. Господин председатель, нестабильность положения на земле, когда уместно говорить скорее о ситуации ни войны, ни мира, усугубляется неопределенностью по поводу дальнейших шагов по реализации мирных договоренностей. Когда в Газу вернется власть палестинской национальной администрации? Когда Израиль выведет свои войска из сектора? Как будет происходить разоружение Хамас? Все эти вопросы имеют прямую взаимосвязь. И если отсутствие деталей в плане президента Трампа на этот счет как раз позволило подвести стороны к согласию, то на данном этапе без честных и конкретных ответов мирные усилия могут увязнуть в потоке бесконечных взаимных обвинений сторон в нарушениях условий сделки. К сожалению, принятая неделю назад резолюция Совета Безопасности 2803 ясности на этот счет не внесла. В ней фиксируются довольно широкие рамки будущего Совета мира, которому поручено надзирать за восстановлением Газа, а также силовой мандат международных стабилизационных сил, которые должны быть развернуты в координации с Израилем и Египтом. Убеждены, что эффективная деятельность этих структур зависит от их тесного взаимодействия с палестинской стороной. Важно также как можно скорее определить четкие сроки передачи властных полномочий в анклаве палестинской национальной администрации, а также отвода из сектора подразделений Цахал. При этом мы до сих пор не слышали о готовности хотя бы одной потенциальной страны-поставщика контингентов участвовать в силовых операциях. Коллеги, что должно сподвигнуть боевиков сложить оружие, если нет уверенности, что будущее Газы в руках самих палестинцев, а не оккупационных сил или неких международных структур? Кроме того, вызывают тревогу сообщения о спонсировании Израилем отдельных палестинских вооруженных группировок для борьбы с Хамас. Такие действия могут иметь весьма опасные последствия. История знает тому немало примеров. Такие сомнения подогреваются и провокационной риторикой со стороны израильских высокопоставленных лиц. Слова министра национальной безопасности Израиля Итамира Бен-Гвира о том, что нет такого понятия, как палестинский народ, а также его подстрекательство к убийству высокопоставленных чиновников ПНА, мягко говоря, не способствуют налаживанию устойчивого мирного процесса. Примечательно, что даже весьма осторожные и расплывчатые формулировки по самоопределению палестинцев из резолюции Совета 2803 вызвали шквал негодования в политических кругах Израиля, потребовавших от премьер-министра однозначно подтвердить позицию о недопустимости создания палестинского государства. В целом наблюдаем весьма опасную тенденцию, при которой стороны конфликта предпочитают вычленять отдельные выгодные для себя элементы договоренности, закрывая глаза на собственные обязательства. Призываем обе стороны добросовестно подойти к выполнению соглашения и предпринять все усилия для того, чтобы избежать возвращения к войне. Особая ответственность за претворение в жизнь мирной инициативы лежит на Соединенных Штатах и странах, выразивших недвусмысленную поддержку американской резолюции. При всех ее недомолвках мы не стали блокировать прохождения документа по просьбе наших палестинских и арабских друзей с тем, чтобы дать возможность Вашингтону попробовать добиться прогресса в решении застарелого палестино-израильского конфликта. Ключ к этому в беспристрастном подходе, когда интересы и озабоченности обеих сторон учитываются в равной степени, невзирая на союзнические отношения и критику со стороны радикальных сил. Крайне важно, чтобы мирный план, одобренный Советом 17 ноября, вернул нас на путь двугосударственного решения, получившего одобрение большинства стран-членов ООН в ходе 2 раундов конференции высокого уровня в Нью-Йорке. Будем внимательно следить за выполнением резолюции Совета 2803 и ждем разъяснения от американской стороны по формированию Совета мира и МСС, а также соответствию их деятельности международно-правовой базе по ближневосточному регулированию интересам как Палестины, так и Израиля. В качестве постоянного члена Совета Безопасности Россия намерена и дальше играть конструктивную роль в достижении устойчивого мира на Ближнем Востоке, краеугольным камнем которого была и остается формула 2 государств для 2 народов, способная удовлетворить как законные озабоченности Израиля в сфере безопасности, так и справедливые чаяния палестинского народа на собственном государстве. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
السيد الرئيس، في البداية أود أن أتقدم بالشكر للسيد راميز الأكبروف على الإحاطة القيمة التي قدمها بشأن التطورات الأخيرة في الشرق الأوسط بما في ذلك الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة. وأعرب عن تقديري للجهود المستمرة التي تبذلها الأمم المتحدة في متابعة هذا الملف الحساس. ترحب الصومال بالجهود الدبلوماسية التي بذلتها كل من الولايات المتحدة وجمهورية مصر العربية ودولة قطر وجمهورية تركيا، والتي أدت إلى التوصل إلى اتفاق لوقف إطلاق النار عبر مؤتمر شرم الشيخ. فلقد لعبت هذه الدول دورا محوريا في تقريب وجهات النظر وتهيئة الظروف لخفض التصعيد ومحاولة تخفيف المعاناة الإنسانية. في الأسبوع الماضي في هذا المجلس ساندنا الجهود التي قادتها الولايات المتحدة عبر دورها المركزي في الوساطة، والتي أسهمت في وضع قرار يحظي بدعم إقليمي ودولي واسع ويهدف إلى تحقيق تهدئة مستدامة. وفي هذا السياق نشدد على أهمية الشروع في آليات للتطبيق الفعال للقرار 2803 والقرارات الدولية الأخرى ذات الصلة، إذ أن الالتزام بهذه القرارات يمثل حجر الأساس للوصول إلى حل شامل وعادل ينهي معاناة الشعب الفلسطيني ويفتح آفاقا جادة أمام المسار السياسي والإعمار وتحقيق السلام والأمن في المنطقة بأسرها. وإن تطبيق القرار 2803 يتطلب تحركا جماعيا وإرادة صادقة من جميع الأطراف، إضافة إلى دعم المجتمع الدولي لضمان وقوف الجميع عند مسؤولياتهم وضمان تطبيق مبادئ القانون الدولي وحماية المدنيين. السيد الرئيس، نشجع جميع الأطراف على البناء على الزخم الذي وفرته جهود الوساطة الأخيرة والعمل على ترسيخ وقف إطلاق النار من خلال آليات عملية تمنع العودة إلى دوامة العنف وتضمن الالتزام الجميع بواجباتهم. وإن استمرار هذا المسار يتطلب تنسيقا إقليميا ودوليا يركز على معالجة جذور التوتر وتعزيز الثقة والالتزام المتبادل. وفي هذا الصدد نؤكد أهمية دورنا الجماعي في الحفاظ على التهدئة ودعم الممرات الإنسانية وتمهيد الطريق لمرحلة إعادة الإعمار بما يشمل إجراءات واضحة تضمن احترام القانون الدولي وتعزيز قدرة المؤسسات الفلسطينية على تلبية احتياجات السكان بشكل فاعل. السيد الرئيس، كما سمعنا في الإحاطة، لا يزال الوضع الإنساني في الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة يبعث علي بقلق بالغ، وندعو المجتمع الدولي إلى ضمان أولا وصول المساعدات الإنسانية بشكل آمن ودون عوائق. ثانيا حماية المدنيين بما يتوافق مع القانون الدولي الإنساني. ثالثا وقف جميع الإجراءات الأحادية بما في ذلك الاستيطان وتغيير الوضع القائم في القدس. وأخيرا الحفاظ على وقف إطلاق النار والبناء عليه نحو مسار سياسي جدي وموثوق. كما نشدد على ضرورة دعم وحماية وكالات الأمم المتحدة العاملة في الميدان وتوفير الموارد المطلوبة لها وتسريع جهود إعادة الإعمار حال توفر الظروف الملائمة وضمان المساءلة عن الانتهاكات الجسيمة التي تطال المدنيين. وفي الختام السيد الرئيس، إن بلادي انطلاقا من إيمانها العميق بأهمية الحلول السياسية والتفاوضية ستستمر في دعم جميع الجهود الإقليمية والدولية الرامية إلى تحقيق أمن واستقرار المنطقة وتلبية الحقوق المشروعة للشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق. كما نؤكد التزامنا الراسخ بدعم دولة فلسطين الشقيقة وحقوق شعبها غير القابلة للتصرف، وفي مقدمتها حقه في تقرير المصير وإقامة دولته المستقلة على حدود 4 يونيو سنة 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية، استنادا إلى مبادئ القانون الدولي وقرارات مجلس الأمن ذات الصلة. وشكرا سيد الرئيس.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席，我感谢阿拉克巴罗夫副特别协调员的通报。巴勒斯坦问题是中东问题的核心，事关地区乃至国际的和平与稳定。我们欢迎达成加沙第一阶段停火协议，但巴以和平还远未实现，平民的苦难还在继续。我们呼吁国际社会秉持最大的紧迫感，拿出坚定的政治决心，为恢复地区和平做出更大的努力。第一，实现加沙持久停火是优先任务。我们关切地注意到，加沙的暴力冲突仍在发生。据报道，以色列已经违反停火协议400多次，造成300多名加沙民众死亡。停火意味着停止一切袭击行为，应得到冲突方的善意遵守。任何导致平民伤亡的事件都不可接受，频繁的袭击不能成为加沙的新常态。中方呼吁有关各方，特别是以色列，全面遵守停火协议要求，推动实现真正的全面持久停火。第二，扩大加沙人道救援是当务之急。加沙人道局势仍十分危急，生存物资、医疗设备等严重缺乏。加沙人道准入依然面临重重障碍，进入加沙的物资远低于停火协议规定的数额。国际法院早已发布多项咨询意见和临时措施命令，明确以色列作为占领方有义务保障加沙人道救援。中方敦促以色列切实履行国际人道法义务，开放全部过境点，取消对人道准入的限制， 保障联合国近东巴勒斯坦难民经济和工程处、救济和工程处等人道机构开展援助。第三，缓解约旦河西岸局势是紧迫要求。占领方持续扩张定居点，纵容定居者暴力，刺激西岸紧张局势。根据联合国记录，上个月共发生260多起定居者暴力事件，造成大量巴勒斯坦平民伤亡和财产毁坏，创下了2006年以来最惨烈的记录。定居点活动违反国际法和安理会决议，侵蚀巴勒斯坦独立建国基础，挤压巴勒斯坦生存空间。以色列应当停止定居点活动，遏制定居者暴力，停止破坏巴勒斯坦民族权力机构的治理基础。第四，落实两国方案是唯一出路。加沙和西岸都是巴勒斯坦不可分割的组成部分。安理会上周通过了2803号决议，相关国家应当秉持对加沙民众、安理会和国际社会负责任的态度，及时向安理会通报有关情况，确保安理会的密切关注和有效参与。任何关于加沙未来的安排都必须坚持8人制8原则，都应当尊重巴勒斯坦人民的意愿。国际社会要汇聚更大努力推进两国方案，反对任何破坏两国方案基础的单边行动，支持巴勒斯坦早日独立建国和成为联合国正式会员国。主席，中方一贯坚定支持巴勒斯坦人民恢复民族合法权利的正义事业，将继续致力于实现持久停火，缓解人道局势，推动巴勒斯坦问题在联合国有关决议和两国方案基础上早日得到全面、公正、持久解决。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, je remercie le coordonnateur spécial adjoint, Monsieur Ramiz Alakbarov, pour son exposé. Depuis le cessez-le-feu, rendu possible le 10 octobre par l'action des États-Unis, du Qatar, de l'Égypte et de la Turquie, l'apaisement précaire qui domine à Gaza appelle l'engagement et la vigilance du Conseil de sécurité et de l'ONU dans son ensemble. 2 décisions importantes viennent de concrétiser cet engagement. D'une part, le renouvellement par l'Assemblée générale du mandat de l'UNRWA pour 3 ans réaffirme son rôle crucial dans l'aide humanitaire et la fourniture de services essentiels à la population. D'autre part, l'adoption de la résolution 2803 autorise la mise en œuvre du plan de paix pour Gaza. Cet endossement est un point de départ. Notre responsabilité collective est d'en superviser l'application. Consolidation du cessez-le-feu, généralisation de l'accès humanitaire, sécurisation et relèvement de Gaza. La France y contribuera à travers 3 priorités. Premièrement, la protection des civils et un accès humanitaire massif, sûr et sans entrave, sous l'égide des Nations unies. La France contribuera à hauteur de 100 millions d'euros à la réponse humanitaire pour 2025. Elle appelle toutes les parties à permettre l'acheminement immédiat de l'aide partout dans Gaza, en coordination avec les Nations unies, le CICR et les ONG internationales, dans le respect du droit international humanitaire. Deuxièmement, le déploiement rapide de la force internationale de stabilisation en appui des efforts de l'autorité palestinienne. Ce déploiement est capital pour prévenir une reprise des violences, sécuriser les opérations humanitaires, accompagner le relèvement précoce, contribuer au désarmement du Hamas et préparer le plein retour de l'autorité palestinienne à Gaza. La France contribuera au renforcement des forces palestiniennes à travers les missions européennes EUBAM Rafah et EUPOL COPS en y déployant près de 100 gendarmes. Troisièmement, l'établissement d'un cadre de gouvernance pour la transition. La résolution 2803 s'inscrit dans un corpus constant, les résolutions pertinentes du Conseil de sécurité et les paramètres internationalement agréés. Elle prévoit la mise en place d'un Conseil de paix et d'un comité technocratique palestinien. La France œuvrera à ce qu'ils incluent l'ensemble des parties prenantes, en particulier l'autorité palestinienne. Monsieur le Président, l'avenir de Gaza et celui de la Cisjordanie sont indissociables. Tout changement démographique ou territorial, toute occupation ou annexion serait contraire au droit international et gravement préjudiciable à la paix. À cet égard, la France est préoccupée par la détérioration de la situation sécuritaire et par les violations du droit international en Cisjordanie. La violence des colons, l'accélération de la colonisation et les déplacements forcés atteignent de nouveaux records. Les récentes déclarations d'autorités israéliennes appelant à des assassinats ciblés contre des responsables de l'autorité palestinienne sont inadmissibles. La France défend la solution à deux États, à nouveau entérinée lors de la conférence de New York, à travers la déclaration qu'a adoptée notre Assemblée générale. Lors de la visite du président de l'autorité palestinienne à Paris le 11 novembre, un comité franco-palestinien pour la consolidation de l'État de Palestine a été constitué. Il contribuera notamment à l'élaboration d'une nouvelle constitution. Monsieur le Président, nous avons tous salué le moment historique qu'ont constitué l'accord du 10 octobre et le plan de paix américain. Pour la paix et pour la réalisation des droits égaux des Palestiniens et des Israéliens à un État et à la sécurité, travaillons en même temps au relèvement de Gaza et à une nouvelle dynamique israélo-palestinienne. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to thank Deputy Special Coordinator Ramiz Alakbarov for his comprehensive briefing. Mr. President, the international community now stands at a crossroad. With the adoption of Resolution 2803 last week, we can now choose a path toward a better future with lasting stability in Gaza. On the other hand, players in the region, state or non-state actors, may decide to pursue another path of endless violence and confrontation. At this critical juncture, it is vital for the international community, including the Security Council, to help the region navigate in the right direction. And we believe that the smooth and faithful implementation of Resolution 2803 provides an essential groundwork to this end. Mr. President, as my delegation mentioned in this chamber last week, some elements provided in the resolution need development and operationalization, includes engagement with the Security Council. However, this resolution also reflects clear and undeniable requirements for its implementation, including the maintenance of the ceasefire. To guarantee the swift establishment of the Board of Peace and deployment of the International Stabilization Force, parties to the conflict in Gaza must not resume any hostilities. In this regard, Israel's airstrikes last week, killing dozens of Palestinians across the Strip, are seriously concerning. We once again call on the parties to strictly observe the ceasefire agreement. With the adoption of Resolution 2803, breaking the ceasefire is not only the violation of the agreement, but also of this resolution. We also would like to stress that this Council reaffirmed its position through the adoption last week that Hamas must lay down its weapons and cannot take part in the future governance of Gaza. We believe that the BOP and the ISF will commence its work as soon as possible in close coordination with its Council. The full resumption of humanitarian aid at scale through the UN system must also be ensured. Shelters and tents must be allowed in as winter approaches. We welcome the opening of the Erez West crossing and the continued operation of 19 UN-supported bakeries across Gaza. We also commend, with appreciation, the coordination of humanitarian works through the US-led CMCC. We also support international efforts for the recovery and reconstruction of Gaza, which was totally flattened during the war. Mr. President, while we have hailed the recent developments in Gaza, in the West Bank we remain deeply worried by the deteriorating situation. Extended military operations, expansion of settlements, and widespread movement restrictions comprise only a small portion of the protracted suffering of Palestinians. We take note that the highest-level Israeli officials expressed grave concern over the rampant and unjustifiable violence by settlers. We condemn this deplorable violence committed by settlers against innocent Palestinians and their agriculture and land. And we call on Israel to take concrete measures to prevent recurrence. Mr. President, when the war in Gaza broke out 2 years ago as a massive military response by Israel to the terrorist attacks by Hamas, many members of this council strongly warned of spillover effects. And unfortunately, we all witnessed the devastating consequences all across the Middle East, including in Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. As new hope arises in Gaza, we must seize this opportunity to change the course regionally from confrontation to harmony and from one-state reality to the realization of the two-state solution. Therefore, we urge all actors in the region to exercise restraint, respect basic principles under the Charter, and seriously engage in diplomacy, including revitalized dialogue between Israel and Palestinians to chart a political horizon for peaceful and prosperous coexistence that we hope to be established under Resolution 2803. Mr. President, recently, President Lee Jae-myung of the Republic of Korea visited Egypt, and in his address at Cairo University, he reaffirmed Korea's commitment to contributing to a peaceful and prosperous future for the region. He highlighted Korea's readiness to advance cooperation with the MENA region under the 5 key pillars of SHINE: stability, harmony, information, network, and education. President Lee also announced a new Korean pledge of $10 million to the Egyptian Red Crescent to help improve humanitarian conditions and provide humanitarian aid to displaced people from Gaza. Here in this chamber, the Republic of Korea solemnly reiterates a strong will to actively contribute to opening a new chapter of peace in the Middle East based on stability and harmony. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for the statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
President, at the outset, let me thank the Deputy Special Coordinator Ramis Al-Akbarov for his comprehensive remarks. Today, I wish to highlight the following points. First, the adoption of Resolution 2803, which Greece firmly supported, marks an important milestone in our collective efforts to stop the catastrophe, giving international legitimacy to the bodies and structures that will oversee and coordinate the implementation of the 20-point peace plan, and hinting that sustainable peace is indeed attainable. The resolution also opens the path for reconstruction and development with the involvement of the World Bank and international donors, making it clear that constructive cooperation among all stakeholders is essential. We look forward to its implementation and additional modalities to be unfolded in the coming period. Second, Greece has been consistent in its calls for a ceasefire for the safe and unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid at scale, recognizing that more needs to be done, more humanitarian corridors must become operational, calling for the urgent lifting of all remaining restrictions. To this end, we support the operations of the UN and its agencies and partners in the Strip, and we welcome the ongoing WHO vaccination campaign and the fact that thousands of children under the age of 3 have already been vaccinated. A lot has to be done urgently. The upcoming and adverse weather conditions are adding urgency to the need for shelter, sanitation, and heating, especially for the most vulnerable Palestinians whose shelters remain at least inadequate. The role of UNRWA is indispensable, taking also into account the ICJ's most recent advisory opinion. Greece has consistently contributed and has recently increased its contribution as the agency advances along the implementation of the Colonna recommendations. Third, the situation in the West Bank merits our focus. According to the UN reports, there has been a sharp rise in settler violence, especially in recent weeks, with devastating impact on olive harvesting communities, property destruction and displacement. OCHA has recorded the highest monthly toll of settler attacks in years. We condemn settlement expansion and settler violence, including against Christian communities, and we reiterate our call for the preservation of the status quo and of the holy sites in the old city of Jerusalem. Increased violence, displacement, and fragmentation of the West Bank undermine the foundations of the two-state solution and the prospect of the peace plan. Fourth, Greece reaffirms its steadfast support for a two-state solution. Security Council Resolution 2803 laid the foundation for a path toward Palestinian self-determination and statehood. The two-state solution, as reaffirmed by the international community during the conference co-chaired by France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and by the New York Declaration, lies at the end of our collective path. The peace plan, backed now by the Security Council resolution, creates a strong impetus toward an accelerated, comprehensive regional integration and the formation of a new inclusive regional security architecture, also through the expansion of the Abraham Accords. In conclusion, President, Greece remains hopeful. The recent ceasefire, although fragile, Security Council Resolution 2803 and diplomatic momentum offer a rare window for stabilization and renewed political engagement. In this context, it is imperative that an empowered and reformed Palestinian Authority should be in a position to exert effective control over Gaza and the West Bank. Greece, alongside its partners, will do its utmost to support the reform process of the Palestinian Authority, for Hamas will have no role of any form in the day after. This Council must remain vigilant, united, and determined to sustain momentum towards a two-state solution, where Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in peace and security. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, and thank you to Deputy Special Coordinator Alakbarov for the briefing this morning. Last week was a historic week for the Council and for the region. A peaceful Middle East with a stable Gaza, free from Hamas's grip, is closer than ever with Resolution 2803. This is grounded in President Trump's comprehensive plan to end the conflict in Gaza. Adopted with overwhelming support, Resolution 2803 outlines a pathway to peace, security, and long-term governance in Gaza. Now the international community must move quickly to deny Hamas any chance to reconstitute. I offer my gratitude on behalf of the United States to all of those offering to help the 20-point plan, implement the 20-point plan in Gaza, including the International Stabilization Force. We invite member states ready to act through the Board of Peace to step up and pledge personnel, equipment, and funding for the ISF. Stability will require burden sharing, and your support will help make President Trump's vision for peace a reality. The ISF will help create a Gaza free of terrorist rule and safe for aid and investment by protecting civilians. This includes humanitarian operations and coordination to secure humanitarian corridors. Humanitarian assistance has surged since President Trump's peace plan took effect. The United States supports the delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza with robust safeguards, preventing diversion by Hamas and other groups. Humanitarian assistance will address Gaza's immediate needs, and investment will revive its economy. We welcome commitments from the World Bank and partner countries to invest in Gaza's long-term redevelopment. The United States remains committed to ensuring that the remains of the last 3 hostages held by Hamas, Ron Giveli, Durar Or, and Sudfisik Rinthalik, return home. The United States remains unwavering in its commitment to Israel's security and the demilitarization of Gaza. The recent strikes by the IDF on Hamas targets were in response to Hamas operatives violating the ceasefire. The United States recognizes Israel's legitimate security concerns. Finally, as implementation of the 20-point plan progresses and Palestinians in Gaza are free of Hamas, we look forward to additional partners joining the Abraham Accords to realize prosperity and peace for the region. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Guyana thanks Deputy Special Coordinator Ramiz Alakbarov for the important updates he provided on the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory. Mr. President, Guyana continues to follow closely the developments in Gaza since the agreement reached between Israel and Hamas for a ceasefire and hostage release deal. We stress that the ceasefire must translate to humanitarian access into Gaza at scale, Israel's complete withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, guaranteed protection of Palestinians from violence, the reconstruction of Gaza, and the rebuilding of Palestinian lives and livelihoods. Guyana is, however, concerned that Palestinians' legitimate expectation for relief from hostilities in Gaza and for a surge in humanitarian assistance has not been fully met. Nutrition needs are also still not being fully met. We have noted, for example, OCHA's report that on 22nd November, all 3 UN missions aimed at collecting tents, food, and other aid supplies from Kerem Shalom, as well as the deployment of UN 2720 international monitors to the crossing to verify the uplifting, were denied by the Israeli forces, citing operational consideration. We also noted OCHA's report that an attempt by the UN and partners to reach the non-functional Kamal Adwan Hospital in North Gaza Governorate to plan the resumption of primary health care services was outrightly denied. Further, Israel continues to carry out fatal strikes in Gaza, with a reported 280 Palestinians killed and 672 injured since the ceasefire. This cannot continue to be the trajectory in Gaza if recovery and reconstruction are to be advanced through the implementation of the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict. Israel must genuinely commit to creating the conditions that would facilitate these goals. This involves complying with all resolutions adopted by the General Assembly and the Security Council, including Resolution 2803 adopted last Monday. With the plethora of needs in Gaza, it is critical for Israel to lift all remaining restrictions on the entry of a diversity of humanitarian assistance into Gaza. The recent rains and flooding have further exacerbated those needs, and the UN and its humanitarian partners should be facilitated in their efforts to bring relief to the population. It is also apt to note that Israel's cooperation is essential for the UN to fully implement its winterization plan for the Gaza Strip, particularly for the provision of shelter materials at scale. Mr. President, allow me to reiterate some observations on Security Council Resolution 2803, through which the Council endorsed President Trump's comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict. The resolution must be carefully implemented to ensure full compliance with international law and the preservation of the two-state solution. We also continue to advocate the full involvement of Palestinians themselves in decision-making about their future, including the future of Gaza. Guyana also stresses that the full withdrawal of the Israeli Defense Force from the Gaza Strip is essential to the Strip's recovery. The guaranteed non-expulsion of Palestinians from the area is also key to preserving the two-state solution. Turning to the situation in the occupied West Bank, Mr. President, Guyana deplores the unrelenting violence directed towards Palestinians, their homes, and their livelihoods by Israeli settlers and the Israeli security forces. The reports of killings, restrictions on access to agricultural lands, demolitions of homes, displacements, and other indignities should not be met with silence from the Security Council. Mr. President, the Middle East peace process must be brought back on track, and the international community must capitalize on the momentum that currently exists to do so. However, Israel must demonstrate that it is truly committed to peace. The continued attacks in Gaza and the ongoing attacks on its neighbors, as we have seen over the weekend with Lebanon, do not align with such a commitment. We therefore implore Israel to choose the path of peace so that the Middle East can rest from the protracted turmoil that it has been experiencing for the past 8 decades. Finally, in reiterating its commitment to contribute to the urgent implementation of the two-state solution, Guyana urges the entire international community, including the United Nations, to do all in its power to safeguard and advance the right of Palestinians to self-determination. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alakbarov for his briefing. We gather today at a critical crossroad where the dust of devastation is beginning to settle in Gaza, and as the first faint signs of a new future begin to appear. Denmark once again thanks the United States, Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey for their relentless efforts towards silencing of the guns. The ceasefire in Gaza has brought about an opportunity for change, but developments over the weekend show how fragile it remains, and we call on all parties to exercise restraint. What happens next will be determined by what is being done now. With the adoption of Resolution 2803 last week, the Council has begun defining the contours of this future, and we must remain engaged, both in the immediate term and in the longer term. In the immediate term, delivery of full humanitarian aid across all of Gaza, as stipulated in Resolution 2803, remains vital. Yet, we are hearing reports of continued restrictions, including on dual-use items, on medical personnel, and on humanitarian partners' ability to operate. And it's concerning that the crucial Rafah border crossing remains closed, and that many international NGOs continue to face deregistration by the end of this year. This is happening as winter and heavy rainfalls are making the situation for the people of Gaza more dire. What Gaza needs now is not charity in fragments, but relief with purpose. Nutrition, safe water, stable shelter, functioning hospitals, energy and sanitation. Delivered through effective corridors without restrictions, in line with the humanitarian principles and in accordance with international humanitarian law. The UN-led humanitarian system remains best placed to undertake this monumental task. Beyond immediate needs lies the massive task of reconstruction. Entire neighborhoods must rise again, brick by brick, across all of Gaza. Palestinians must be part of designing the blueprints of their own homes. They must be part of determining the path of their own recovery, in deciding how their communities are rebuilt. And they must have influence on how the stabilization force operates as a protective presence in full compliance with international law. All of this must happen without Hamas's rule. The Council should remain engaged and receive further clarity on the establishment of the Border Peace and the International Stabilization Force, as well as the developments on the ground, including in the Civil Military Coordination Center. Mr. President, as we lift our gaze towards the wider horizon and the long-promised two-state solution, the pathways to Palestinian statehood must be laid out with clarity and credibility, rooted in equality, dignity, and security for both peoples. The contours of that future must be sketched now. We also must not allow the West Bank to disappear behind the headlines of Gaza. While attention has been turned elsewhere, the West Bank has faced devastating developments: settler violence, intimidation, the torching of homes, the seizure of farmland and destruction of crops, forcing families to flee their villages. We fear that these are not isolated sparks, but part of a spreading fire that threatens the very prospect of peace. We cannot accept such a fire to catch hold. Our message must be unambiguous. Gaza and the West Bank are not two stories but one. They must be reunited under reformed and renewed Palestinian Authority, capable of governing a future state that stands alongside Israel in peaceful and democratic coexistence. Mr. President, the moment is delicate, but possibility lies within it. Let us choose the path that honors international law, the right to self-determination, and security for all. A path that rejects terrorism and lights the way towards the only horizon that offers lasting peace: two peoples, two states, living side by side. Let me reassure you of Denmark's continuous commitment to that effect and to the implementation of the Gaza Peace Plan as recently endorsed by this Council. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Sierra Leone. Colleagues, I thank Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Mr. Ramiz Alakbarov, for his important briefing. The situation in the Middle East remains complex and fragile, even if it is currently relatively stable in some respects, reflecting emerging understandings on the cessation of hostilities across the region, including in Lebanon, despite recent missile strikes, and Yemen. We also note positive development in Syria and the encouraging prospect for consolidating effort towards lasting peace in the country. In this statement, we will focus on the situation in the Middle East, occupied Palestinian territory. Since the Council adopted Resolution 2803, with a clear sense of urgency to maintain the ceasefire in Gaza and to implement a comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict, Sierra Leone has, in its explanation of vote of 17th November, already set out its understanding of the legal effects and parameters of the resolution. Today, Sierra Leone will therefore focus on what it means to implement this resolution in good faith. We do so against a sobering reality. 6 weeks into the ceasefire, Palestinian civilians continue to be killed and injured in Gaza. Continued missile and air strikes in the Strip, notwithstanding the declared cessation of hostilities, raises serious concerns about compliance with both the resolution and international humanitarian law. Implementing Resolution 2803 in good faith requires that the ceasefire be respected in fact and not only in words. We therefore call on the government of Israel to strictly uphold the ceasefire, exercise maximum restraint, and fully respect its obligations under international humanitarian law and human rights law, including the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution. Likewise, we demand that Hamas and all other armed groups cease immediately and unconditionally all acts which constitute a breach of the ceasefire and continues to endanger innocent lives. At the same time, development in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, remain deeply troubling. Report of continuing settlement expansion, settler violence, home demolitions, and land confiscation and movement restrictions, as well as other measures aimed at altering the demographic and territorial character of the occupied Palestinian territory, are contrary to international law and relevant UN resolutions. Occupation and annexation in whole or in part remain illegal under international law, and any attempt to entrench such practices undermine both regional stability and the viability of the two-state solution. Implementing Resolution 2803 in good faith therefore also requires that these continuing illegal practices in the West Bank cease, as they directly erode confidence and the prospect for a just and lasting peace. Resolution 2803 endorses the comprehensive plan and calls on all parties to implement it in its entirety, including maintenance of the ceasefire in good faith and without delay. It also establishes critical mechanisms to give practical effect to that plan, including the Board of Peace as a transitional administration with international legal personality and an international stabilization force to help secure and stabilize the situation in Gaza. Despite the urgency and needs of the civilian population in Gaza, the BOP has still not been appointed and operationalized. The terms of reference for the BOP are unknown, and Palestinian participation, including the Palestinian Authority, unclear, leaving a serious gap in governance, coordination, and oversight of the transitional arrangements foreseen in the resolution. Sierra Leone therefore calls for urgent designation and appointment of the BOP's leadership and members with broad-based regional and international support so that it can begin discharging its responsibilities without further delay, in line with the participation and aspirations of the people of Palestine. We likewise urge Member States working with the BOP to take the necessary steps to establish and deploy the ISF as mandated by the Council. The ISF's role in helping to stabilize the security environment, protect civilians and humanitarian operations, support the demilitarization of Gaza, and assist vetted Palestinian police force is central to consolidating the ceasefire and preventing a relapse into large-scale violence. Its deployment should be accompanied by full cooperation from all parties in accordance with international law and with due regard to the views and needs of the affected population. On the humanitarian front, implementing Resolution 2803 in good faith means ensuring safe, sustained, and unhindered humanitarian access, respecting the humanitarian principles, and putting in place the financial arrangement envisaged for Gaza's recovery and reconstruction. Humanitarian personnel and facilities must be respected and protected. The flow of food, water, medical supplies, shelter, materials, and other essential goods must be facilitated, and assistance must be used solely for peaceful purposes and not diverted. Sierra Leone calls on donors, international financial institutions, and relevant UN entities to step up their support, and on all parties to remove any remaining obstacles to a comprehensive humanitarian response. Colleagues, implementing Resolution 2803 in good faith also carries a clear legal and moral dimension. all parties, state and non-state actors alike, are bound to respect international law, including international humanitarian law, international human rights law, and the Charter of the United Nations. Continued missile strikes in Gaza in the context of a declared ceasefire and the persistence of illegal practices in the West Bank cannot be reconciled with those obligations. Silence or inattention at this juncture will risk normalizing non-compliance and further entrenching impunity. This is not the time to be silent, nor to turn our attention away. Sierra Leone therefore forcefully calls on the State of Israel to halt all actions inconsistent with its obligations under international law, including unlawful use of force in Gaza and illegal settlement-related activities and other coercive practices in the West Bank. Secondly, we demand that Hamas and all other armed groups cease all armed activities, fully respect the ceasefire, and refrain from any conduct that endangers civilians or undermines the prospect for peace. Thirdly, we call on prospective members of the BOP and contributors to the ISF to move swiftly to operationalize these mechanisms and ensure that they function with transparency, accountability, and full respect for international law. Sierra Leone encourages the wider international community and the United Nations to sustain high-level political engagement, provide the necessary resources, and use all diplomatic tools at their disposal to promote strict compliance with Resolution 2803 and other relevant resolutions. In closing, we must reaffirm that only a just and lasting peace, grounded in international law and realized through a negotiated two-state solution with Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security, can address the root causes of this conflict. Implementing Resolution 2803 in good faith, imperfect as it may be, is a necessary step towards that goal. We owe it to those who have lost their lives, to those who continue to suffer in Gaza and the West Bank, and to future generations to ensure that the commitment under the comprehensive plan are translated into concrete, life-saving action on the ground in support of peace, stability, and security. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I would like to remind speakers to maintain appropriate standards of tone and content in their remarks and uphold the respect this chamber and the matter under consideration deserves. And I'll give the floor to the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine.
Mr. President, allow me at the outset to thank you for convening this meeting and to commend your presidency for highlighting defense of international law. Allow me also to thank Deputy Special Coordinator, Mr. Ramiz Al-Akbarov, for his briefing and appeals and for his efforts, and through him to thank the UN, its Secretary General, its agencies, including UNRWA, and most importantly, its staff on the ground who have faced death, suffering, and starvation as they attempted to save lives throughout the last 2 years. There is no substitute to the role of the United Nations and its agencies when it comes to humanitarian aid, education, and health, a role needed today more than ever. Mr. President, Palestinians in Gaza waited desperately for the horrific war against them to end. And they welcomed more than anyone around the world the announcement of the ceasefire agreement. But Palestinians are still being killed and maimed, with aid restricted and reconstruction delayed. Palestinians want all of this to end. And they don't want to lose half of Gaza in the process. The ceasefire must be upheld and respected in full. Nothing can justify that 1,000 Palestinians have been killed or injured since the onset of the ceasefire. Nothing can justify that since the start of the ceasefire every single day, 2 Palestinian children are killed by Israel. And while recognizing that situation is, of course, not comparable to what it was before the ceasefire, it is essential to remember that the loss of a child for a family is earth-shattering, especially when you thought that they had survived the war and they could now be safe. We should never forget we are talking of the survivors of a genocide that are still having to escape death and suffering every single day while being prevented from rebuilding any part of their life. Nothing justifies that families are confronted with the harsh winter in tents drenched in water, that their basic needs and rights are not upheld, that the health and education systems that have been destroyed are yet to be rebuilt. Nothing justifies that communities continue to be forcibly displaced. At every juncture, the U.S. administration has to intervene, often at the highest level, to prevent the ceasefire agreement from collapsing altogether. The mediators, the U.S., Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, whose efforts are highly appreciated, instead of being able to focus on the day after, have every day to deal with the one crisis after another. It is a deliberate attempt to prevent us all from moving forward towards life, towards liberty, towards peace. And yet, our people in Gaza show the world every day how determined they are to restore life in Gaza. Even before they could have a home to keep them warm and safe, the first thought of our people in Gaza was to get their children to resume their education, despite the impossible circumstances. In this connection, we salute UNRWA for having about 100,000 kids receiving education by the end of this month. They are trying to restore in the midst of ruins and in the most inhumane circumstances some form of normalcy. Mr. President, Palestine together with the region and the world welcomed the Trump plan as a means to end the war. It did so fully aware of Israelis' intentions. Israel seeks the collapse of the ceasefire as it continues to pursue the 3 things that President Trump's plan denied it: forced displacement, occupation, annexation. It is trying to achieve this aim by stalling the entry of humanitarian aid, by resuming its attacks, and most importantly, by trying to entrench the yellow line or even to advance beyond it. Everywhere in the region, the same policy: land grab disguised under security pretext. In Palestine, in Lebanon, in Syria, Israel knows security would be best achieved by just and lasting peace, but continues to fuel perpetual war. Everywhere it is undermining the efforts to cease fire and achieve peace. It is in this context that the Security Council adopted Resolution 2803, which owed a lot more to this complicated reality and to the efforts to consolidate the ceasefire and to move to phase 2 than to the realization of the rights of the Palestinian people or the achievement of peace at this juncture. And yet, the resolution simply referring to Palestinian self-determination and statehood drove the Israeli government crazy. Netanyahu felt compelled to come out publicly to say no Palestinian state under any circumstances, followed by a renewed call by the Israeli Prime Minister for the displacement of our people from Gaza. Gaza is Palestinian, and in fact, this is an understatement. Gaza is the bleeding heart of Palestine, like Jerusalem is its beating heart. There is no Palestine without Gaza. And the future of Gaza will be determined by Palestinians, and it is one in which there will be no occupation, no blockade, no annexation, no food, no forced displacement. Our right to self-determination is enshrined in the UN Charter, and before that, our right to freedom is enshrined in natural law. Nothing can alter this right, and our people will not renounce it. And Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, are one Palestinian territory confronted with the same policies, even though at different scales. Mr. President, it is imperative that the attacks against the Palestinian people in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, by occupation forces and Israeli settlers, are brought to an end, and with them the policy of displacement and replacement of our people by uprooting communities and colonizing the land. In this regard, we hope that the very important and strong condemnations that we have heard in recent days will translate into actions that will ensure our people will no longer be subjected to such horrific attacks. Israel must also bring an end to its policy aimed at undermining politically, financially, and militarily the Palestinian Authority to thwart the prospect of independent statehood. It must stop its attacks and release the withheld tax revenues. Mr. President, this Council has often spoken of the fate and treatment of Israeli hostages now finally free. There is no explanation why it should not show more attention to the plight of Palestinian prisoners who are arrested by the thousands, often detained without any explanation or justification, and subject to the worst forms of abuse. When a video leaked of the rape by Israeli jailers of Palestinian prisoners, the scandal in Israel was about the leak, not the rape. Some openly considered the rapists as heroes and praised them for their despicable act. There are many testimonies of sexual abuse against men, women, and children. Behind bars, doctors and humanitarians are treated as animals. 100 Palestinian prisoners have died in Israeli custody in the last 2 years, either killed or left to die through medical neglect and starvation in very harsh conditions. Where else would such numbers, such facts, such horrors be met with so little attention and almost disregard? I will state once again what I have often repeated in these halls. In addition to the loss, the pain our people feel comes from the humiliation of being openly described and treated as human animals, as expendable, as if they were not children of the same God, humans endowed by their Creator with rights. The first step towards peace and coexistence is Palestinian freedom and recognition of our existence. Every life matters, and we must stand together against all attacks against civilians, regardless of the identity of the victims, regardless of their nationality or faith or origin. We must stand together against subjugation, abuse, and violations, regardless of the identity of the perpetrators. We must stand against a reality and discourse that breeds hatred. We must stand in defense of all children, of life, of humanity, of human dignity, of shared humanity. We must act for peace, and Palestine will observe its obligations and honor its commitments and must be empowered to do so. But peace must be a shared objective to become a common reality. We will continue to work with the U.S. administration, Saudi Arabia, and other regional and international partners to chart this irreversible and credible pathway towards freedom, independence, and peace. Mr. President, it is time to choose peace, a peace that comes through the fulfillment of Palestinian rights, not their continued denial, a peace that comes from mutual recognition, not negation, from accepting that we belong, all of us, to humanity, and that as such, our rights and our dignity must be respected. It comes from accepting that security has to be shared to be sustainable, and that we will neither disappear or surrender. Mr. President, a lot has been written about what happened in these halls a few days ago. Even more importantly, a lot has been written about what is happening on the ground as we speak. So it is useful to assert in all clarity that what is Palestine's position and the position of the 8 Arab and Islamic countries and the position of the Arab and Muslim world and of the international community at large, so there is no ambiguity about the objectives we are pursuing. We want to see the ceasefire respected by all and rendered permanent. Israeli forces have to fully withdraw from the Gaza Strip. There can be no occupation, no annexation, no partition of Gaza, no separation from the West Bank, and no forced displacement. There must be no violence and no incitement. There must be one Palestinian state, one Palestinian government, one Palestinian law, and one Palestinian gun. Israel's illegal occupation of the Palestinian territory must come to an end without delay, as concluded by the International Court of Justice and numerous resolutions of this Council and the General Assembly. The independence of the State of Palestine must be achieved and the two-state solution implemented. This is what fundamental and peremptory norms of international law that constitute the pillars of our international law system prescribed. And this is the path to peace. Allow me now to say a few words in Arabic. سيد الرئيس، اسمحوا لي في الختام أن أقول كلمة حول دور الجزائر في مجلس الأمن، والتي قادت على مدار عامين كافة الجهود من أجل تحقيق وقف إطلاق النار. وقف إطلاق نار يضع حداً للإبادة الجماعية في غزة، وعملت مع الأعضاء المنتخبين العشر لتقديم القرارات وحشد الدعم لها من قبل باقي أعضاء المجلس، بالرغم من محاولات ثنيها عن ذلك أو اصطدام هذه الجهود بالفيتو. وبشأن القرار الأخير قامت الجزائر بتقديم باسم فلسطين والمجموعة العربية عدد من التعديلات الجوهرية تصون الحق الفلسطيني سويا مع صوماليا وبدعم من باكستان، وحازت هذه التعديلات على دعم واسع من أعضاء المجلس، وتم إدراج بعضها في النص وبعضها لم يتم إدراجه. واستمرت الجزائر حتى اللحظة الأخيرة في محاولاتها لإدخال تعديلات على النص بما في ذلك بصفتها الوطنية، وذلك حتى بعد صدور بيان الدول الثمانية العربية والإسلامية مع الولايات المتحدة دعما للقرار. أما عن تصويتها فكان بإمكان الجزائر النأي بالنفس، وهذا القرار الأسهل، ولكنها اختارت أن تتماشى مع مطلب الوسطاء، والذين قالوا بكل وضوح أنه في نظرهم صدور قرار من مجلس الأمن ضروري أمام إمكانيات انهيار وقف إطلاق النار، وهذا ما أدى إلى موقف موحد للدول الثمانية ولفلسطين والجزائر، خاصة وأن الجزائر تجلس في مجلس الأمن كممثل للمجموعة العربية. إنقاذ غزة وإنقاذ شعبنا في غزة يتطلب قرارات مصيرية وصعبة، وعلينا أن نعمل جميعا كي يكون إنقاذ غزة هو حجر الزاوية نحو إنقاذ فلسطين وتحقيق حرية شعبنا وصون كرامته. كلنا نعرف المخاطر والمخططات التي تحاك لنا، وتتطلب هذه المرحلة منا جميعا رص الصفوف واتخاذ قرارات شجاعة من شأنها إفشال هذه المخططات وضمان تحرير الأرض والشعب وتحقيق السلام العادل والشامل وفقا لقرارات الشرعية الدولية لا قانون الغاب. تحيا غزة وتحيا فلسطين. نحن طلاب حرية وحياة، ومن حقنا أن ننعم بكلاهما لا أن نختار أحدهما، فشعبنا ضحى بما فيه الكفاية، ومن حقه أن يحيا بحرية وكرامة على أرضه وأرض أجداده فلسطين. شكرا سيد الرئيس.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I would like to thank the Deputy Special Coordinator, Mr. Ramiz Al-Bakrav, for his briefing. Mr. President, Israel welcomed the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict. We thank the United States of America and President Trump for pushing this process forward with moral clarity, conviction, and courage. Israel is fully committed to meeting our obligations under this plan. We have facilitated hundreds of humanitarian aid trucks entering Gaza each day, more than 800 trucks a day in the last week. We have clearly marked the yellow line to ensure operational clarity. We have released Palestinian terrorists, not prisoners, terrorists, including murderers, and withdrawn our forces as required. We are working in close coordination with international partners. Hamas, on the other hand, continues to blatantly violate the terms of the plan. They failed to meet the 72-hour deadline to return the hostages. They have already killed 3 of our soldiers during the ceasefire and repeatedly sent terrorists across the Israeli lines to attack our forces. This Saturday brought yet another breach. A Hamas terrorist entered Israeli-controlled territory to attack our soldiers along a humanitarian aid corridor. Israel responded by eliminating 5 senior Hamas operatives involved in these attacks. Israel will continue to honor its commitments under the plan, but we will not hesitate to neutralize immediate threats to our citizens and our soldiers. We remain focused on achieving our goals, bringing our fallen hostages home, and ensuring that Hamas is disarmed. We are still waiting for the return of the bodies of our 3 fallen hostages so that they can be given the dignity of a proper burial. We wait for Ron Gvili, Dror Or, and Sudisak Rintalak from Thailand. All of them are not forgotten. We will bring them home. Mr. President, many times in the last year I have emphasized that we would not stop until we brought all the hostages home. You heard me, repeating it every meeting. Israel has proven when we set a goal, we pursue it with determination and we get it done. That same determination guides our second goal. Hamas must be disarmed. Not partially, not symbolically, fully and irreversibly. The truth is that there can be no peace, no stability, and no future for Gaza while Hamas remains armed. That must be the focus of the international community. In the wake of the ceasefire, the world has seen that Hamas, what they do to the people. You saw the pictures where they publicly execute Gazans in the streets, crushing dissent, and silencing anyone who questioned its rule. As we speak, Hamas is attempting to assert its control over parts of Gaza. Israel will not allow terrorists to rebuild or reposition. They can take off their green handbands, but changing into a civilian outfit does not turn terrorists into partners for peace. This plan would succeed only if Hamas permanently loses its weapons. Some colleagues, even today, have suggested that the Palestinian Authority could be the one to disarm Hamas and rebuild Gaza. But this assumed the PA would suddenly do something it has never done and has never has proven incapable of confronting radicals. Terror groups operate openly. Iranian weapons slip into Judea and Samaria unchecked. Extremists grow stronger because no one stops them. So Israel has to step in to seize the weapons the PA ignores, to dismantle the cells it won't confront, and to disarm the terrorists it refuses to challenge. Last month, for the third time this year, Israel intercepted a major Iranian shipment bound for these groups. It included 29 explosive mines, 15 rockets, and 60 pistols, all sent by Iran into Judea and Samaria. This is the consequence of PA inaction. Israel is left to dismantle the terror networks they refuse to confront. The PA is not short of armed bodies. Let me name a few of them. They have the preventive security, Al-Aman al-Wiyaki, with about 4,000 trained operatives. They have the civil police, Al-Shurta al-Madaniya, of 9,000 operatives. They have the Presidential Guard, Al-Aras al-Raisi, of 2,000 operatives. The Civil Defense, and its largest armed wing, the National Security Forces, with roughly 8,000 uniformed personnel. And you add to that the general intelligence and military intelligence networks, and the PA controls over 32,000 armed operatives. 32,000 in Judea and Samaria. The PA has the manpower, the equipment, the resources to fight these terrorists. You should ask them why they do not mobilize those forces. Send the troops from Ramallah to stop the violence, confiscate weapons, and confront these terrorists. Moreover, the Palestinian Authority is not only failing to stop terror, it is incentivizing it. The clearest example is the PA's pay-for-slay policy. And I want to remind my colleagues of what we exposed last month when we met. The PA is still paying terrorists, but now it's under different packaging. In February, President Abbas told the world he was reforming the system because many of the countries here, you told him we will not give you any more money if you will not stop with the pay to slay. So he said very nice in English that he would reform the system. He scrapped the old law and replaced it with a shiny new plan, and it's called now social criteria. That was the English language version. But a few weeks later in Arabic, Abbas said something very different. At a gathering of the Fatah in Ramallah, he said, and I quote, "I told you once and I stand by my word, even if we have only one penny left, it is for the prisoners and the martyrs." I think he used that quote also at the UN. This is double language at its worst, Mr. President. What is more is that the new system didn't shrink the program of pay to slay. It expanded it. More than 2,000 households suddenly became newly eligible. And let's be honest, that is not welfare. That is putting terrorists on a payroll. For example, a terrorist who murdered innocent civilians and was convicted for 10 years in prison, he will get every month $1,800 directly to his family account. And when he gets to jail, he will get a special bonus, a lump sum of $4,500. You know, in Ramallah, it's a lot of money. A benefits package most law-abiding young people in Ramallah can only dream of, that all of a sudden the family will get a monthly stipend, almost $2,000. They don't need to work. They don't need to worry. And you look at the budget of the PA, and we heard a few concerns from distinguished colleagues about the budget of the PA. It tells the rest of the story. In 2024, the PA paid $144 million in these stipends, salaries to terrorists. In 2025, they have already committed $214 million, and the year is not over yet. The PA, unfortunately, has not ended pay for slay. It has grown pay for slay. Abbas has now dismissed his finance minister in an attempt to blame one person for a system he himself protects. But we are not fooled. They can replace a minister, but they cannot replace the facts. You cannot fight terror. You cannot disarm terror while you pay for it. Mr. Mansour, it is time to end pay for slay now, once and for all. Mr. President, this week we mark 78 years since the UN proposed the partition plan of 29 November 1947. The proposal divided the land between Jews and Arabs so both could live side by side. Israel accepted it. We said yes. The local Arab leadership rejected it and instead declared war on Israel 78 years ago. That choice became a pattern. Whenever a real opportunity for peace appeared, we moved forward, but the Palestinian leadership stepped back. In the Oslo years, Israel recognized the Palestinian leadership and negotiated directly with them. At Camp David and Taba, Israel entered serious talks. In 2008, Israel tabled a detailed plan on all issues. Each was an opportunity for peace, and each was missed. Mr. President, a leadership that refuses to disarm terrorists and continues to reward them is not building peace. Today, almost 78 years after the General Assembly's vote of 29 November 1947, Hamas and other terrorist groups are trying to set the tone and dominate the region. Israel will not let that happen. We will safeguard our security and move forward with reliable and moderate partners. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.